Good day, and welcome to the Budding Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Bridges. In each episode, I cover my experiences, both good and bad, of being a business builder, as well as my journey through the crazy world of entrepreneurship to reach my goal of earning $10 million a year. All right, we're on episode 100 today. This is kind of a nice opportunity for me to kind of think back and to the first one or two podcasts that I had to literally read. And now I kind of go by the seat of my pants. I do my whiteboard to tell me what's going on and organize my content. But it's amazing. 100 episodes. I'm really happy about this. So, the budding entrepreneur, today's episode is streamlining your business. Now, there's a lot of people who talk about streamlining a business, and the first thing they do is they approach everything from the point of view of we're going to have to fix business process. And I say, that's true. At some point you will. But for right now, I want you to focus on streamlining your business like you would any kind of building. There are really 4 dimensions. I know, 3 dimensions, height, width, depth, right? But there's also time. And time is our 4th dimension that we deal with because you'll see pretty soon how it affects things. When we're looking at width, what we're talking about is a number of commitments we make to our clients or our customers. How broad are we going to fill this information and do these services and get things going, right? And from a dollar perspective, to expand out or expand in is, I call it $1 sign. Simple enough, right? Height, on the other hand, that's the number of layers we have. Think of it as the number of floors you have on the building. And the more floors you have, the more of a footprint you need solid in order to support that height. And so if you're going to make a change and you're going to build a layer, we're going to say this is $2 signs as opposed to width, which is 1. Depth is where we get into the biggie. As you add complexity, you add depth. This is where you have a lot of people who have degrees and they're experts and they're subject matter experts. And so the cost of increasing your depth is now $4 signs because we've added complexity. The biggest problem with streamlining a business is we have to reduce the number of complexity. We have to simplify. Not make it easier, but simplify. And then the 4th dimension is time. And this is essentially an infinite cost environment where we're dealing with speed. The number of people that are involved in whatever you're doing affects both speed and cost. So this is something that you have to kind of take a look at and decide If you're going to streamline your business, which of these 4 dimensions are you going to focus on first? Which one second? Right? So width is easiest. We're just going to narrow it down. We're going to pull it back a little bit, and we're going to say, this is what I want to focus on here. That's what most marketing people do. Height, being the number of layers, is we're going to do basic, and then we're going to do complicated. We're going to have a value ladder, introduces height. As you grow the business, you increase the number of layers. Therefore, as you're looking at a value ladder, maybe you want to have something really simple and something more complex. And finally, you have this top level that is, you're dealing with the cream of the crop. So height can depend, as you're doing your value ladder, it's the number of layers you go. And as we said, depth is complexity. If you want to scale back your business at some point, you have to sacrifice one of those 3: width, height, depth. And the easiest one to pull back on is depth. You want to take a more narrow focus of things and start pulling back in closer to you from your perspective. We're going to make that building not so deep. We're going to make it not so wide, but we're going to allow it to be tall. Or we're not going to allow it to be tall. We're going to allow it to be wide, and then we're not going to be very deep. Depth is one of the reasons why I don't work with healthcare. Because everybody has to be, there's multiple layers. There's doctors, there's nurse practitioners, there's nurses as registered nurses, there's certified nursing assistants, there's medical assistants. All of these people have depth, and it affects the cost of how things work. So if you're trying to simplify, medical is not possible to simplify. It's just, it can be a very big mess. And I talk with people a lot about this. The complexity of healthcare is there is a practice and there's a business. The business deals with the insurance companies and the practice deals with the patients. And neither of the twain shall meet, right? It's really a confusing thing. So I gave up on the healthcare industry a long time ago for this very reason. When I was in IT, worked okay. No big deal. Because you're dealing with computers and servers and networks and simple things, right? But when you get into business management, it becomes a much harder factor to deal with. And then we talk about time. If you want something faster or slower, it affects the overall cost, but it also depends on the number of people that were involved. You take these 4 dimensions and you can decide which one you want to focus on first. Then you have to decide which one you want to focus on second. Beyond that, the 3rd and 4th ones are pretty much set. So if you want to focus on depth and width, you end up with something that's moderately high, very relatively narrow, and relatively not deep if you want to pull it back and save yourself some costs. This brings us to a second concept that I deal with a lot is foundation. When you build a house, where the house sits right on top of that, the foundation supports all the corner beams, all the sides, and everything else. When you're dealing with like a log cabin, the foundation doesn't matter as much because the pieces of wood, the long pieces of wood, stack angularly at corners to support the weight of the house. One of the biggest mistakes I see in foundations is people destroy their old foundation when they start scaling, when they start building the business, and they're willing to toss away what got them here. And that is a very big mistake because If you destroy the old foundation, you have a problem scaling back. And I'll tell you a story in a few minutes about this, but with your foundation, you have to have a foundation that you don't destroy. You can keep building on it. I like to use the analogy of the Winchester Mystery House, where Sarah Winchester continually had her carpenters and workers and things building this house nonstop. And it's a fascinating story. If you get a chance, there's some videos out on YouTube and Rumble and all over the internet about the Winchester Mystery House. And it's kind of freaky to go in there. I used to live, 30 miles from it. Sarah Winchester was very short. I mean, really short. And so you have areas of steps that are only 3 or 4 inches high to the next step. And, then the next step. And inevitably, as they built this house, the scale of the house would depend upon Sarah. There's a spot on the second floor. This is a Victorian mansion. It's huge, but they continually built on it. They had to build new foundations as they were growing. They couldn't get rid of the old foundations because they had to support the old part of the house. And so I was walking along in the tour one time, and I looked, and in the middle of the floor is a hole. I don't mean like there's a hole in the ground. There's a big 3-foot by 2-foot opening that will drop you if you keep walking from the second floor to the first floor immediately. That was amazing to see that. It's like, why would you do that? I have no idea, but they were building for the sake of building. And you don't want to do that. If you destroy the old foundation, your house cannot be built up. It cannot be built out, cannot be built in 3 dimensions. And certainly the time that it takes increases as you go and you do your work. And there were many times when there was a staircase that would, wrap around and go back up and it'd just end at a wall. And you're like, why? No idea. So if you ever get a chance, just go watch some of the videos of the Winchester Mystery House. It's in San Jose, California. It's a fascinating place, a fascinating story. She was heir to the Winchester rifle family. This is something I'll just let you go and do your thing. But this was an example of how, people had to deal with foundations constantly. They'd have to build a new foundation over and over again. But here's what happens when you're looking at your foundation. You don't want to destroy the old one. You want to build on it. You want to build a new foundation that allows your house or building or business or whatever to be much larger. Because when you have to scale back, it requires a foundation. We often think about scaling as being, we're going to grow. Right? We're going to grow up, we're going to grow out, we're going to grow deep. But in an economic challenge, you have to pull back. And if you have no foundation to pull back to, you have no business. Now, go to the story that I alluded to. I was doing about $20,000 part-time on this one business, doing certain things. I was given a contract by a company, very nicely done. As long as I was working, I was billing the same amount every day. The way this worked out, I was on pace to go to $200,000 a year, which is nice. I literally 10x'd my business. Here's the problem. In January, I got the $200,000, you got this much up front, and every month you build. And the contract ended in September. And I went from $200,000 back down to $20,000. The only reason I was able to survive that kind of a drop was because when I was in managed services, we would have customers under contract that would, they just decide, well, we don't want to do this anymore. They're on contract, but you kind of work with your customers as much as you can, your clients. I would always be stuck at the end of the contract with vendor costs to support that client. At the time, I said, well, it's not a problem, until I got the end of the contract and I'm like, holy crap, I have to figure out how to pay these vendors because my contract is ended, so I'm not getting paid anymore. So I had to write into my agreements and contracts that if the client chose to end the contract, they had to give me 30 days advance notice, number one, and they had to choose one of two things. One, in the last month of the contract or whatever, they would either not expect us to live up to XYZ of the contract, or they had to pay for those services for the next month to make up for it. That was nice, but, it was one of those kind of things I had to put in place because we had several people that went out of business. This was when businesses were dropping like flies in 2008, 2012, and a few other years. Companies would just die. And you'd be like, holy cow, how do I deal with this? I had one company that the head of operations called me and said, hey, Randy, do you have a key to get in our business? And I said, well, yeah, I think this was like a Thursday or something. I said, yeah, I have a key. They're like, well, can you come down here and unlock our door for us? I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Unlock your business? There's like 6 of you that have keys. Well, yeah, but there's a chain on the front door, and the chain has a different lock. We can't get in. Turns out, the owner had ripped up everything, lock, stock, and barrel, and left town and just completely walked away. I went down there, but there was nothing I could do because I didn't have a key to that lock. And literally people were out of business immediately. They had no income. They had no jobs. The company had just folded overnight. This happened quite a bit. And it was kind of scary when it happened. But for the people that were working, they were like, do I ever get paid? And I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. If you can't have a foundation, this is the kind of wrap up. If you can't have a foundation to roll back to, you're kind of screwed. Sorry, I hate to say that. It is what it is. But what helped me was seeing all that. And then when I was facing it many years later, I left my $20,000 intact. I didn't get rid of it. I kept it. So when that $200,000 dropped by 10x the other way, I continued working. And that is the biggest reason you do not destroy your old foundation. You build on it. You expand it. You do whatever you have to. But when you got to scale back, you got to have a foundation to go back to. I will end episode 100 with kind of a maxim that I've developed over time. You have to remember that when you are scaling a business or growing a business, you have to have a checkpoint that you can go back to. What must go up must come down. You don't want to find yourself in a position where you have nothing to go to. Always plan for worst case scenario, if you can. Build your business to allow for your foundation to expand and contract. Always have plan B, and in many cases, a plan C. This is our episode 100 for the Budding Entrepreneur podcast. I'm wishing you the best in your health, your wealth, your business. I hope this topic was good for you. I got to edit out a couple of spots, but this has been a fun one because I get a chance to kind of think about how I deal with my clients moving forward and some of the things that I've pulled from the back. I like this streamlining a business. We deal with 4 dimensions, kind of run over it again. You have 4 dimensions: width, height, depth, and time. And with your foundation, don't destroy your old one, build on them, because scaling back requires a foundation. When you're 10xing your business, always remember the 1x. It will keep you going in the event there's a problem. Signing off today, thank you very much for episode 100, the Budding Entrepreneur Podcast, wishing you all of the greatest. We'll talk to you next week. Have a great time.